Now, this says for law enforcement eyes only. It says it's going to be given to public and private organizations federally. In other words, it's distributed outside of Missouri. Now, this Virginia terrorism threat assessment document goes after all sorts of groups, and right in the front page it says, to only be to intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, Department of Defense, and says no report or segment thereof may be released to any media sources. Again, we had somebody on the inside. And this one goes after, quote-unquote, lone wolf extremists, special interest extremism. You can be anti-abortion, you're in this, if you go to a certain college. They literally say that some of the tools are YouTube, Google Video, MySpace, Facebook, Twitter. They say that they are Al-Qaeda-like, in quotations. And I mean, these documents have all come to light in the past few weeks, and the newest one is only a 9-page document, which solidifies this theme further. It is a Department of Homeland Security document now getting into the mainstream, not giving us any credit that we found it, but basically saying the same exact thing. Extremism and terrorism are the same things, and these are the groups to look for. And this Virginia terrorism one goes county by county and group by group.
So that's really, really scary. I guess what I would ask is, can you, send me the documents or the links to the documents?
Oh, yeah,
so
we got them all.
Look at them and show them.
I'll tell you what, I'll send them to your Facebook right after this interview in their PDF files. Yeah, no problem. And you can check them out. But let's just go over the examples in your film of harassment of citizens groups.
Sure. I mean, well, one thing I wanted to know from you, Jason, is what do these documents, how can I put this? For as long as there's been law enforcement and the FBI, different extreme groups on the margins or the extremes of both sides of the political spectrum have been under, observation. And that's kind of a normal part of intelligence. And in a way, I don't have any problem with that because that's just part of keeping track of things as long as it's not illegal. But what I wonder is, what do these documents say police forces should do with these groups? I mean, it's one thing to make note, well, here's what the Ku Klux Klan is up to. Here's what, the anarchists are up to. I mean, that's necessary to, have intelligence. But if they're saying, well, prosecute them or, infiltrate them illegally or surveil them illegally, that's different. So what's
I would say definitely surveil illegally would be one of the main things. I mean, the surveillance, they're actually in these documents talk about the surveillance they've already conducted. They talk about instances, for instance, that on April 15th of last year, the big End the Fed campaign, federally, they talk about the incident on April 1st and the 15th that happened in Virginia. And they basically cataloged people who filmed the Federal Reserve System as potential terrorist threats. I mean, they're saying that they're taking surveillance. Yes. Well, and then when I was mentioning the Twitter factor, remember I talked about those things, they were giving the example in that one that people who were at the Republican National Convention, and these were protesters and activists, they used this to coordinate against the police so that they couldn't be boxed into their free speech zones. And they said that was Al-Qaeda-like. So what I'm seeing with these documents is that they are trying to associate almost every type of activism with not only extremism, but terrorism. I mean, when you look at the covers of these things, and it doesn't say extremist, it says terrorism threat assessment. It's very apparent what they're doing, and I will make sure to send the link to those 3 documents so you can check them out yourself, because they're appalling. And 2 of them are very easy to go through, and the third one with the Control F, you can go through, and you just can't believe. I mean, they're basically saying, James Madison College is a recruitment center for right-wing extremists. And that correctional facilities are recruitment centers for right-wing extremists. It's really generalizing, everybody as a problem.
Right. Well, God, the founders in their wisdom, once you erode a republic, I mean, what did the Bush administration do? They started to target environmentalists and peace activists as terrorists. And they designated them as traitors and subversives. I've got a whole chapter on that in The End of America and elaborate on it in Give Me Liberty. And so this is a lesson. It's a lesson to all future presidents that you can get away with this in America, and as long as there's impunity. So now that the winds have shifted and there's new administration, it sounds like law enforcement is sort of looking at the other end of the political spectrum and saying, well, these people on the right, if they speak up, are terrorists. But I completely agree with you that the underpinning of all of this activity is profoundly un-American, and it's to exactly characterize dissent and criticism of the government as, Al-Qaeda-like, as terrorists. And this is, Give Me Liberty is a sequel to The End of America because people said, well, what do we do now? So I looked back at what the founders intended us to be as Americans and what it meant to be American. And it turns out that the very first principle in America is the Declaration of Independence says you are supposed to criticize the government. And you're not only supposed to criticize the government, you're supposed to rise up against the government if it is no longer reflecting the will of the people. That free speech and free assembly are fundamental to being American. And I've got this long sequence in Give Me Liberty about how through over-permiticization, the right of citizens to assemble and petition their government for redress of grievances, which is what you're talking about, has been under assault through bureaucracy, death by 1,000 cuts. So that now, you mentioned free speech zones. Now it is getting harder and harder and harder for people to simply assemble and gather and create real marches or protests that change anything. And you've got to stop traffic to change anything, right? The protests we have now are neutered. And you can go to YouTube to see a discussion I gave about this. It's getting quite a bit of viral traction, that basically the great marches have to stop traffic, nonviolent, but they have to stop traffic. That's illegal in America now. And so increasingly what we're seeing, and you've really put your finger on it, is the kind of tamping down on all forms of dissent and all forms of criticism and assembly. Well, look at the First Amendment. The First Amendment doesn't say, you have the right to petition government for redress of grievances if you have a permit, or if you're in a free speech zone, or if you say only the right things. If you're American, you're supposed to say whatever the hell you want. That's the First Amendment, and you're right that it's under assault from these documents.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just bringing that up, I don't know if you caught the story on the Hillary movie, but that the Supreme Court, and this is a movie I actually did watch, and it is oftentimes like a right-wing attack ad, I guess. But at the same time, some of it, some of the stuff in the documentary is legitimate, and it plays out like a real documentary. However, this has been brought now to the Supreme Court, and one of the quotes from Scalia just scared the hell out of me. He said, when they rule on this in June, and I guess they've all watched it by now, they'll know whether people have the right to write and publish, as if freedom of speech doesn't cover. I swear to you, just type it in. Just type in Hillary movie, Supreme Court ruling, and you can see. I think that one was out of the AP or Reuters, but they're ruling whether or not that this would have to be labeled as a campaign ad, whether they can regulate whether or not it can be distributed through certain media sources. All these things based on this Hillary movie, and I don't think it's really that well done. Your movie is much better. But at the same time, for them to come out and say that they're going to rule on free speech and whether it's protected in a film is absolutely ludicrous.
Well, again, Jason, forgive me for kind of taking polite issue, but there are a lot of, I think, legitimate regulations about campaign speech. I mean, for instance, I have a 501c3, which means it's a nonprofit organization, and we have to be nonpartisan. And the minute we're partisan, we're violating our 501c3 charter, and we can't raise money as a 501c3. And I think that's fair. I think that's legitimate. Campaign speech is, very powerful, and and because of campaign laws that keep people from, being corrupt, basically, in the campaign process, there are, I believe, legitimate restrictions on what is considered campaign speech and what isn't. So I'd have to take a look at that ruling, but they may not be saying you can't speak or you can't write. They may be saying, should this be considered basically a political commercial? And if it is a political commercial, it comes under a certain kind of category of law. And I do actually agree with that.
Well, I'm just worried that they might use it to go against some of the political documentaries that we do here in this office. I'm a filmmaker. I've made a couple documentaries. I would just hate that.
I was very impressed with Loose Change. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. But I mean, I would be scared that all of a sudden it's ruled that this can't be on a, on a share network like YouTube or MySpace. Right. All we do is give this stuff away on purpose so that we can get the message out, just like you talking about being able to take the End of America, bring it to your local church, or have a party at home and bring people in and please, take a look at this information. I mean, when they say whether, Scalia is not sure whether the issue to write and publish is covered under the First Amendment, I think this is ludicrous. And what really scares me is, China a few weeks ago banned YouTube altogether. Since then, I think they've allowed some of it. But when you see such a broad banning, and then people like Jay Rockefeller get up there and say, you know, the internet's gotten out of control and we need to regulate it further. I mean, that seems to be their goal.
When did he say that?
Just type in Rockefeller internet control, and he basically said there needs to be new regulations on the internet. And yeah, we'll pull the article up right now.
He said that?
I think within the last month. Yeah, Jay Rockefeller. He's getting behind some of this legislation now to try to basically regulate the internet. And this is the last free bastion of speech. You know, this is why, you know, people like myself even exist in this kind of, you know, alternate media universe, is because of the internet. And when you see a lot of things shutting down, like I forgot which big newspaper just shut down, they're no longer going to print, they're just going to be online.
A lot of them.
Yeah, well, Associated Press is trying to go after people who use their content now. You know, it used to be a newswire where you could pick up, and now they're saying they're going to go after all these people. I'm like, oh my God.